Thank you so much. Thank you, Nicholas. I love the line about a crippled laptop is better than no laptop. I'm planning to use that a lot. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion part. So let me set up our discussion by looking at the amazing turning point that we are at. A real turning point politically, culturally, and in our personal lives. Politically, I can say without any hesitation that were it not for the internet, Barack Obama would not be president. Were it not for his ability to master the internet, to fundraise, to organize, to make the connection between the internet and the street, which Howard Dean failed to make, and to actually get the voters out to the polls, all that was a huge victory for the grassroots organizing that part of our session is going to deal with. And now we see how the internet has not yet come of age when it comes to governing. It's still struggling to find its proper place in a country where the special interest remains supreme. So we had, a president who arrived with all the great intentions to change Washington, to bring about fundamental change, and then he was confronted with very organized interests, with thousands and thousands of lobbyists, many of whom were former chiefs of staff of powerful members on the Hill, and all of them were able to raise tens of millions of dollars to lobby against reform. So that's the clash we have been observing in the last few months. And what we have seen is that the amazing machine, the 13 million people that Barack Obama had galvanized are pretty dormant right now, because it's very hard to galvanize without a clear message. And that's a tremendous lesson. It's not enough to have 13 million people available to you, to have their email addresses, even their cell phones, to be able to text them and communicate with them. You need to have something to communicate that will really engage them if you're going to have results. And just to give you an example, when the president does not take a clear stand on what he's for and what he's against in healthcare reform, it's much harder to say, take to the streets for healthcare reform. But which healthcare reform? The public option, no public option, trigger, opt-out? When it gets confusing, grassroots organizing on the internet is not as powerful. So at the same time, it's our only hope. The ability of the internet to demand transparency and deliver transparency is absolutely critical right now. Because we have this amazing phenomenon where the government has committed an unprecedented amount of money, trillions of dollars, to bail out the financial system. And where the Treasury Secretary has actually admitted that we don't know where the money is gone. That is pretty unprecedented and clearly completely unacceptable, especially at a time when everything can be theoretically transparent. So this is really the big battle at the moment for transparency and accountability. And we see people online organizing around that, both creating different groups like Americans for Financial Reform and using all the social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, to actually gather support around the need for fundamental reform. We've had also this major debate about, is it going to be old media or new media? Is it going to be content behind walls, or is it going to be free for everyone? And I actually consider this debate really obsolete. I don't think it's about old media and new media. Everybody in the old media is practicing new media. Reporters are blogging, and anchors are tweeting, and there is no clear demarcation line now between new media and old media. In a way, it's yesterday's media and today's media. And the fundamental issue here is going to be, are we going to accept the disruptive technologies that are now part of our daily lives, or are we going to pretend that we can hop onto a machine back into the past and somehow put content behind walls? I believe that those who try to do that will fail. We at the Huffington Post have no intention to do anything but continue to be entirely free and advertising supported. And when it comes to investigative journalism, which is the question that's raised often, how do you support investigative journalism that takes longer and requires more resources? What we are doing is we launched the Huffington Post Investigative Fund, and we are raising money from foundations. And increasingly, our model is the same as ProPublica's model and other investigative efforts around the country, including at the local level, to bring in the resources of prominent individuals who care about journalism, foundations that care about journalism. So in the same way you raise money for a university, we need to be raising money for investigative journalism. And let me also remind everybody that traditional journalism has not done a great job in the last few years when it comes to the two major stories of our time, the lead up to the war in Iraq and the economic meltdown. The majority of mainstream journalists failed to do good reporting on both. So that's where, again, the internet is of tremendous value, because while the mainstream media, in a way, are suffering from ADD, a kind of attention deficit disorder where you often break a story and then quickly move on beyond it before it's really had the time to have any impact, online journalism is suffering from OCD, a kind of obsessive-compulsive disorder, where we stay on a story and stay on a story until something happens. And Josh Marshall, our Talking Points memo, demonstrated that with the Attorney General scandal, a story that was broken on Talking Points memo gradually, where the community participated in providing information and developing the story, and which led to the resignation of the Attorney General. So that's the kind of journalism that we are seeing more and more of, which uses the best of traditional journalism and the best of online journalism. At the Huffington Post, during the campaign, we launched Off the Bus, which was a way to bring together thousands of citizen journalists to report and to break stories around the country. Now our new project is called Eyes and Ears, and we've launched various projects. The first one was Blogging the Meltdown, when we've had people all around the country again reporting what was happening in their communities. Now we are calling it Bearing Witness 2.0, and we've asked people to send us stories about foreclosures, loss of jobs, or innovative things happening in communities to get us out of the crisis we still are, despite the fact that Wall Street is doing well. So when we look at this whole issue of bearing witness and the internet, Roger Cohen of the New York Times wrote a piece about how there is no substitute for being there. And of course, in many ways, there is no substitute for being there. But if you look at what happened during the Iran uprising, if it were not for the internet, if it were not for tweeting and cell phone photographs and instant video, we would not really have known what is happening in Iran. And we had a 24/7 live stream curated by our national editor, Nico Pitney, that was really amazing. Again, we could not just put everything out unfiltered. The internet does not do away with editors. The editors still are needed to deal with the whole gushing stream of information. But that's how the trust is developed. And also, here is one of the things that is incredibly important. The course correcting is so quick. Sure, there are mistakes that appear, but I'm always stunned by how quickly they are corrected and how transparently they are corrected. And it's not, of course, as if the mainstream media did not make mistakes. I mean, they made mistakes on the front pages of the major newspapers, including, for example, the reporting by Judith Miller in the lead up to the war that was completely false, and that drove, to a large extent, American foreign policy. So what we're aiming for now is to have that instant self-correcting that happens online. And also, in a sense, we saw during the last campaign, and we're seeing it now, the end of Rovian politics. It's much harder to sustain a falsehood with the internet. The whole idea, for example, that Barack Obama is not an American citizen. Have you noticed how it died? It became really hard to sustain, because when you put all the documents online and when you put all the falsehoods online, the sunlight makes it very hard for these delusional statements to be sustained long term, and that's very good for democracy. We also see how a country like China, and I'd love to hear about that from our next speaker, but when, for example, there was an uprising in the summer in the Western region, what the Chinese government chose to do, having learned from what happened in Iran, was to basically choke off Twitter and the internet and make online communications almost impossible, and instead invited foreign journalists to take a tour of the region. And I found that absolutely fascinating. The idea was that you can manipulate a handful of journalists, but you cannot manipulate thousands of tweets and thousands of blogs and thousands of first-hand accounts of what is happening. And we've seen that, of course, again, with the way that so many journalists have in the past and in the present traded access for their own freedom to speak their mind. I mean, we saw that classically with Bob Woodward, a major American journalist whose two first books about Iraq got it completely wrong. He had unparalleled access, but he was seduced by the access. And he told us how many mints there were on the cabinet room table. But he didn't tell us what exactly was happening and how we were being misled into war. So this is all by way of saying that I'm really excited about this golden age of news consumption that we are entering. Doesn't mean there aren't obstacles and problems along the way, but it is a golden age. And the new consumers are used to consuming information in certain ways. They are used to having it freely available, and they are used to being much more engaged with it. When we launched our partnership with Facebook, social news, whereby anything you read on the Huffington Post, anything you comment, immediately seen transparently by your friends and vice versa, although there is also a stealth mode. So if you want to look at a story that you don't want your friends to know you're looking at, you can push stealth mode. But we're finding that as we are creating this digital water cooler, that our readers are so engaged in the way they consume news. They read about it, they often forward it, they share it, they develop it, they add information to it. will.i.am said on a panel that we organized during the Democratic Convention that there are two ways of consuming news. You consume news sitting on a couch, which is how you tend to consume television or more old media, or you consume news galloping on a horse. And a lot of what the internet encourages is consuming news galloping on a horse in a very engaged, participatory way. And that's good news for democracy. And we put that to effect 2 weeks ago at HuffPost when we launched a new section that we're calling Impact, where actually right by news stories about people needing help, families needing help, nonprofits needing help, there is a widget, and you can help, send money, commit time right there and then. And the first family we profiled was the Stein family. The mother had gone blind because they didn't have the money or the insurance to pay for health care. Within 3 days, we raised $30,000 for them. Right now, we have an ask, as we call it, for a place called Home, a place that cares for at-risk children in South Central Los Angeles. And before I left, we were at 104% of what we had asked for it. So again, we see here the way that people who are consuming news and through the internet really want to participate in a very direct way. And so we can make a lot of news actionable, which will simply increase the way that the participation in our democracy and the health of our democracy. So let me just end by saying that there is going to be an ongoing controversy about what we're leaving behind and where we are going. And it's really a controversy that's not just about the internet, but about our times. I remember speaking with Jonas Salk just before he died, and he was telling me how we are moving, he said, from Epoch A to Epoch B. Epoch A was driven by competition, and Epoch B will be driven by cooperation. And you see that on the internet. The internet is all about the linked economy. It's not about either or. It's not about you buy Time or you buy Newsweek. If you like going to the Huffington Post, you're more likely than not going to another dozen sites. The more people are used to getting all their news and information online, the more they're going to spend time online, and it benefits all of us. So it's a very, very different model than the model that we had been used to. And in the same way, it's going to be easier, and we're going to need it desperately, to tap into the better angels of our nature and make our lives not just about ourselves, but about our communities and about the world. So thank you.